All right. Good morning. My name is Jeff Price, and this is my colleague Charmaine Wood. Excuse me, getting over a cold. We are both students at the Legal Innovation and Technology Lab, and we're here today to talk to you about a project that we did for Palace Law, which is a personal injury law firm up in Washington State. Now, first, I'd like to give you a little story about a problem that Palace Law was having. So Palace Law was in the situation a while back where they were getting a lot of calls, but not taking a lot of new clients in as a result of these calls. So that's a little curious what was going on there. They dug into it, and they found that the clients who were calling in didn't necessarily have the issues that coincided with Palace Law's area of expertise, which again is personal injury, or otherwise the clients were just not a good fit for the firm. Further investigation found that they could trace this back to a pretty generic advertising campaign. So think something like, if you need a lawyer, call us, which is obviously going to garner a large swath of responses, right? The good news is that as a result of this research, Palace Law was able to change their advertising strategy to more precisely target their intended clientele. The bad news is this took a lot of time and a lot of resources away from Palace Law to get to the root cause and eventually take corrective action. So this is just one example of an issue that Palace Law encountered, but you can think of many, many other examples that a law firm or any business really might encounter on a daily basis. So the question we are here to discuss today is, how can technology help solve some of these issues? So I've listed three up on screen there. First, you can imagine being able to view or graph data to do some real-time trend analysis, and that might be able to buy down on the lag time that I just discussed in the Palace Law example. Second up there is the use of machine learning or AI to augment the decision-making process. And in fact, this is the goal of the project that we did for Palace here that Charmaine and I have been working on for the past couple of months, so more about that in just a second. Third, you might imagine a veteran employee or partner at the firm leaving to retire, to go off to greener pastures, and taking with them a lot of institutional knowledge about the firm, right? So that's a big loss for the firm when those people leave. However, those veterans that go on have left the fingerprints of their intuition and experience on the decisions that they've made while at the firm. So if you have data from those decisions, you can codify some of that institutional knowledge by creating an algorithm that leverages that data. So for the case at hand, Charmaine and I, were trying to create a model for Palace Law to help augment their decision whether or not to accept or reject a new client. And so to do that, Palace Law gave us access to some anonymized client intake data that they had been collecting. This is stuff, as you can imagine, for a personal injury law firm, like nature of the injury, body parts injured, etc., but also some demographic information like date of birth, right? Again, all anonymized. Importantly, Palace Law kept track of whether or not they had actually accepted or rejected the cases which they gave us data for. And then one final note about the data itself. This data was in different locations, right? So maybe this spreadsheet over here had some demographic information, this spreadsheet over here had some personal injury information. So one of the first things we had to do was to consolidate all of that in order to facilitate the modeling process. So I'll let Charmaine talk to you about how we overcame that and several other obstacles for this project.
So as Jeff mentioned, we obtained the data in two different spreadsheets. So we needed to merge them together in order to have one data frame. So once we had one data frame, we needed to go through the information on the spreadsheet to delete any inconsistencies or any duplicate information. Additionally, we needed to identify the target and the feature variables. So in the Palace Law situation, the target variable was whether or not the case should be taken, and the features are any of the variables that would impact that decision-making process. some of the features that we obtained in the data frame did hold value to the target, so we included them in our algorithm. But there were some features that weren't present in the data frame, but we were able to engineer the variables to include it in our algorithm. Additionally, we noticed that there were some features that held no value to the target, so we removed them. So it's important to note that the feature variables in the target needs to be represented in a numerical value. So when we went through the data, anything that was represented with a yes, we changed it to a 1, and anything that was represented as a no was changed to a 0. So once we were able to determine which features were most desirable, we needed to divide that data into a training set and a test set. So the training set would go through the 4 models which are displayed on this slide and develop a pattern in which the test set would follow. So once the test set went through the models, it listed out a number of statistics which we had to determine to figure out which model was the best one to use. It's important to note here that one of the statistics that are produced is accuracy, and that is not the most important component to consider because it doesn't tell the entire story. So to better understand this, Jeff has an example.
Thanks, Charmaine. So you might be wondering why you wouldn't want necessarily the most accurate model, or why accuracy isn't the best judge of the model, how good the model is performing. So we can think as an example about trying to predict whether or not a school like Suffolk Law is going to have a snow day, right? That might be a useful thing to predict. Here in Boston, even here in Boston, snow days are relatively rare, right? Compared to all of the other days that school is open, right? So you may come up with a model that gives you, with 98% accuracy, whether or not you'll have a snow day. The question you have, though, is that model doing a good job at predicting whether or not you're going to have a snow day? So on the one hand, you can have a model that's actually taking in all of the inputs that you're giving it, precipitation, temperature, wind, all these things, taking that in, doing a fairly good job of predicting whether or not you're going to have a snow day, but messing up once or twice, right, to get to that 98% accuracy. Or on the other hand, do you have a model that's doing a very poor job of taking in all those inputs and just spitting out, hey, you're always going to go to school, right? And because there's so few snow days, you still get to that 98% accuracy mark. But clearly, these two models are different, the former being much better at actually modeling what you want it to model. Yet they both have 98% accuracy. So that's why we need some of these other statistics that Charmaine's mentioned to help decide whether or not the model is actually a good model.
So once we were able to identify which model to use, we looked at the statistics and determined that there was still room for improvement. So we went back into the algorithm and looked at any of the features that we may have overlooked originally and included them in the algorithm. So the ultimate goal of this project was to produce a quality score. So this quality score will allow the employees at Palace Law to have a feel of the types of cases that they are dealing with in real time. So more than that, Palace Law employees will be able to obtain an average quality score, which will allow them to identify problems which we discussed earlier, why there are a lot of calls coming in, but not as many cases are being taken. So ultimately, this method will augment the employee's intuition. So additionally, we were able to develop a user interface which the Palace Law employees will be able to input the information that they obtain from the client and instantly get a quality score so that they will know right away whether or not they should take the case or not while they're still on the phone with the client. So that's our presentation, and thank you. And if you have any questions, we're going to be at the poster session.